Entry 6 Easton, Maryland, Saturday, June 27th, 2:36 p.m.
What was he? We were back at the table. They'd let me clean up in the bathroom. I showered and dressed in borrowed gym clothes. The shakes had started in the shower. Adrenaline accounted for a lot of it, but it was more than that. After 30 minutes, my hands were still trembling, and I didn't care if Church saw it. He shrugged. We're still working on a name for his condition. Condition? The son of a bitch was dead. From now on, Church said, we may have to consider dead a relative term. I had to sit with that for a while. Church waited me out. That is the same guy I shot at the warehouse, right? I mean, I put him down hard. I saw blood and bone on the walls. Javad Mustapha, an Iraqi national. Church agreed, nodding. Your shots were mortal, but not immediately so. He was still alive when transported to the hospital, where he was pronounced DOA. He revived shortly after arrival. He spread his hands. We controlled that incident, and you won't find specific mention of it in the papers or any official report. Holy Christ, are we talking zombies? Church smiled faintly. We're calling him a walker, short for dead man walking. The head of my science team has too much of a pop culture sensibility. And before you ask, it's not anything supernatural. How did this happen? Some kind of toxic spill? A plague? We don't know. A prion disease, perhaps. Or a parasite. Maybe both. But certainly something that causes hyperactivity of the stem cells. True to the nature of parasites, the infected have a totality of purpose built around procreation. Not sexually, of course, but through a bite that is apparently 100% infectious. We've only begun to research it. Is it only his bite that's infectious? I asked. It felt like ice-cold army ants were marching around in my gut. We've done a number of tests on sweat and other bodily fluids, but the strongest concentration of the disease is in the saliva. The bite transmits the infection. I looked at the bruise on my arm. I'm not wearing Kevlar. If I'd been bitten in there... He looked at me. Anger was a white-hot furnace in my chest. You're a total rat bastard, you know that? As I said, Mr. Ledger, this is the new face of terrorism. A fierce, terrible bioweapon we don't yet understand. It may take us months to even construct a viable research protocol, which means that time is completely against us. We think that your friend Javad in there was the bioterrorist approximation of a suicide bomber, that he was the patient zero for an intended plague directed at the U.S. The blue case recovered at the scene was some kind of climate-controlled containment system, quite possibly to protect the other cell members from their own weapon. None of the others at the warehouse showed any signs of infection. He paused. We think we stopped them. You think? I heard how he had leaned on the word. Yes, Mr. Ledger. But we don't know. And we have yet to know. We have to know just as we have to be ready in case this happens again. If Javad is the only plague vector, then we'll scratch that one up for our side and start looking for their next trick. Or try to be ready for whenever they try this trick again. If, on the other hand, there are other teams out there ready to launch others like Javad, well, that's part of the reason the DMS was formed. Then you'd sure as hell better check with the task force commander, because 2 panel trucks pulled out from that warehouse the night before we hit. We tracked one and lost one. Yes, losing one was sloppy. I fought the urge to flip him the bird. Who's behind this? Is that an Al-Qaeda thing? Because the task force was never able to pin that down. That's still uncertain, though we have some suspicions. The other members of the cell are a mixed bunch. Al-Qaeda, Shia extremists, 2 Sunni extremists, and even one from Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Shia and Sunni working together? Interesting, isn't it? Church said dryly. The name you picked up in your wiretap, El Muhajid, lends a little weight to the idea of collaboration. He's been known to work with several of the more extreme splinter groups. I assume you interrogated the surviving cell members, right? He said nothing. Well? They're all dead. Suicide. How? Didn't you search them for, cyanide pills in their teeth and all that shit? Church shook his head. Something a bit more clever than that. Each of them had been infected with a pathogen of a type as yet unidentified. They needed to take the drug every 8 hours to keep the disease dormant. Without the drug, the disease becomes active with incredible speed and immediately begins to erode vascular tissue. We don't know, or we didn't know, rather, this until they started bleeding internally. And even then, we barely got enough information out of the last one to understand the shape of it. The control substance was hidden in ordinary aspirin tablets. We would never have known to look. Is this the same disease that my dancing partner in there had? No. And as far as I can tell, it's non-communicable. I've had some of the top scientists in the world working with the DMS, and so far, they've been scratching their heads. Some of them are actually impressed. So am I. This is some pretty sophisticated shit we're talking about here. And yet simple. You wouldn't even need much in the way of guards and threats. One person with the pill bottle to control them all is all they'll need. Very easy to manage. This level of sophistication raises our opinion of this cell and makes their potential that much greater. I said, what happened to the other guys? The ones who auditioned before me, did they get bitten? One did, I'm sorry to say. 2 others did not. Jesus Christ! It was an effort not to leap across the table and tear his throat out. I watched Church's face, saw the shift of his body language, and the anger in my voice registered. If I had gone across the table, he'd have been ready for me. What about the other 2? You go rescue them? No. They both managed to cuff the suspect. Then I don't understand. It isn't only the physical component of the test that matters, Mr. Ledger. Each of them faced the moment of truth, as you yourself are doing now, and each of them reacted. He paused, pursing his lips. Inadequately. In what way? In ways that identified them as unsuitable candidates. He waved his hand, dismissing that line of discussion. Why am I here? The golden question. You're here, Mr. Ledger, because we are scouting for candidates to flesh out our DMS team. We're a new agency. We have lots of funding, and we have a nicely vague set of parameters. Our intelligence division is hard at work to infiltrate and report on cells such as the one your team took down in Baltimore. We're surveilling the location where the first panel truck went, and we have high hopes of discovering the destination of the other. And you want me to sign up? He showed his teeth again, kind of a smile. No, Mr. Ledger. I want you to go to the FBI Academy as planned. I don't... Only now you'll have a clearer focus on which parts of the training to pay more attention to. Medical and management courses would be worthwhile. You can probably imagine which other ones would be of use. We sat for a while with that comment hanging in the air. And when I'm done? Church spread his hands. If the threat is over, truly over, you may never hear from me again. If you look for proof of my existence or of the existence of this organization, you'll find nothing of any use, and I don't advise trying. You will, of course, say nothing about what has happened here. I make no threats, Mr. Ledger. I believe I can trust both your intelligence and common sense in the matter. What if there are more of these things, these walkers? In that eventuality, I will very probably be in touch. You have to know that this isn't over. It can't be. Nothing is that simple. I appreciate your cooperation today, Mr. Ledger. With that, he stood and offered me his hand. I looked at it and then at him for maybe a full 10 seconds for deciding which neither his hand nor his eyes wavered. Then I stood and shook his hand. As he left, Buckethead and the others came for me and drove me back to my car. They didn't say a word, though on the drive back, each of them cut me wary glances every now and then. As they drove off, I memorized the license number. Then I got in my SUV and sat for maybe 20 minutes, staring through the window at the beach and at the happy people playing in the sun. A second wave of the shakes hit me, and I had to clamp my jaws shut to keep my teeth from chattering. It was like the way I felt after 9/11. The world had changed again, just as terror had become a far more common word to us all then. Terror was a much scarier word to me now. What would I do if Church called me back?